The internet remembers everything, especially its ghosts. For the urban exploration community, the Galleria at Black Creek was the holy grail, a concrete behemoth abandoned mid-construction in the 90s, a monument to failed capitalism. The official story was bankruptcy following a catastrophic structural collapse. But the whispers online, the ones that drew my crew, the Asylum Seekers, told a different tale. They said the builders found something in the earth, something that didn't want to be disturbed. They said the mall wasn't abandoned, it was quarantined. We went in seeking viral fame. We thought we were ghost hunters. We were really just walking into the trap. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The air inside the Galleria at Black Creek tasted of forgotten things. It was a thick, metallic cocktail of damp concrete, rusted rebar, and something else, an earthy, subterranean scent like a freshly opened grave. Dusk bled through the skeletal skylights of the main atrium, painting the cavernous space in shades of bruised purple and dying orange. "Whoa," Ben breathed, his voice a hushed reverence that was immediately swallowed by the oppressive silence. He lowered the heavy bolt cutters from the service door we just breached. "This place, it's a cathedral." He wasn't wrong. The scale was obscene. 3 stories of unfinished storefronts stared down at us like vacant eye sockets. Escalators, frozen in mid-ascent, were draped in years of dust and graffiti. In the center of the vast floor, a gaping maw destined for a grand fountain was just a pit of shadows and debris. "Cathedral of consumerism, buddy," Leo said, his voice booming with the practiced bravado of our channel's host. He unslung his primary camera, the red recording light blinking to life like a single malevolent eye. "Ben, get the drone up. I want aerials of this mausoleum stat. Maya, you feeling the vibes?" I was. A heavy, unnatural stillness pressed in on me, different from any other abandoned site we'd explored. Old hospitals had the lingering sorrow, prisons had echoes of rage. But this was just heavy, an ancient, patient weight. "It's quiet," I said, adjusting the audio receiver clipped to my belt. "Too quiet." "It's an abandoned mall, Maya. It's supposed to be quiet," Leo scoffed, already framing a shot. "This is the content our subscribers have been begging for. 30 years of decay, the legend, the holy grail of East Coast urbex." As Leo launched into his hyped-up intro for the live stream that would begin once we were deeper inside, I focused on my role. I walked the perimeter of the atrium, my footsteps the only sound. I ran a hand along a concrete support pillar. It was cold, colder than the ambient air, and it seemed to thrum with the faint, almost imperceptible vibration. It wasn't the hum of machinery. It was lower, more resonant, a feeling in my bones more than a sound in my ears. Ben, ever the pragmatist, was already setting up his drone, its propellers whirring to life with the sound that felt like a sacrilege in the dead air. "Perimeter's clear," he called out. "No squatters, no security. We're golden." The drone ascended with a clean electronic buzz, its camera feeding spectacular, sweeping shots of the mall's skeleton to Ben's tablet. From this vantage point, we were ants in the ribcage of some colossal beast. Exposed rebar curled out of unfinished floors like skeletal fingers. Plastic-wrapped pallets of long obsolete fixtures sat like forgotten offerings. "Look at this place," Leo narrated to his camera, panning dramatically. "Capitalist dreams dead and buried. They said a structural collapse in '93 killed the project and a half-dozen workers, but we're here to find out if something else collapsed with it." As a drone banked, its powerful LED light cut across the second-floor promenade. For a split second, the light illuminated a dark space that was supposed to be a department store entrance. And for a split second, I saw something. Not a person, not an animal. It was a shape, a dark, jagged form that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It was there, and then it was gone, swallowed by the returning shadows as the drone moved on. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice tight. "Did see what? I'm trying to fly this thing without clipping a girder." "Up there," I pointed. "Second floor, north side." Ben glanced up from his tablet. "Movement?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling foolish. "It was a shape. It looked wrong." Leo grinned, his showman persona snapping back into place. "Wrong is what we do, Maya. Wrong is what gets us views." He clapped Ben on the shoulder. "Take us in deeper. Let's find out what secrets this tomb is hiding." Ben expertly piloted the drone down a long, unfinished corridor, the darkness swallowing it whole. We followed, our powerful flashlights cutting cones of white into the oppressive black. The air grew colder. That strange, earthy smell intensified. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before, as if the mall itself were holding its breath, waiting for us to discover that we weren't the only things to have breached its concrete skin. We were just the first ones in a very, very long time. We ventured deeper, moving from the cavernous atrium into what would have been a department store wing. Here, the sense of incompletion was even more jarring. Mannequin parts, torsos, arms, heads with blank, serene faces lay scattered across the floor, some still wrapped in factory plastic. Metal framing for changing rooms stood like empty cages. "This is incredible," Leo whispered, his voice laced with genuine awe he reserved for places truly lost to time. He was sweeping his camera across the scene, capturing the urban decay in all its haunting glory. "It's like the rapture happened mid-sale." Then we heard it. It wasn't a creak of old metal or the whistle of wind. It was a deep, resonant groan that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the building. It was the sound of immense weight shifting, of stone grinding against stone. A fine shower of concrete dust rained down from the unfinished ceiling above, sparkling in our flashlight beams like malevolent glitter. Ben froze, his head snapping upwards. "Whoa, that's not normal settling." "That's fantastic," Leo countered, a thrill-seeker's grin plastered on his face. He aimed his camera at the ceiling. "You getting this, Ben? Imagine we capture a real collapse on camera. The view count will break the internet." "Or the ceiling could break us," I muttered, an icy dread coiling in my stomach. The sound hadn't felt like a random structural shift. It felt intentional, like a sleeper stirring in its bed. Ignoring our apprehension, Leo pushed forward. The plans I downloaded showed the architect's on-site office should be at the end of this wing. That's the jackpot. Blueprints, logs, maybe some old photos. My role was research, and I had spent weeks digging into the Galleria's history. The architect was Alastair Finch. Brilliant guy, bit of an eccentric. The Galleria was his magnum opus. After the quote-unquote collapse, his career was ruined. He died in obscurity a few years later. We found the office door, its plywood surface warped by 30 years of humidity. Ben shouldered it open with the crack of splintering wood. Inside, the air was stale and thick with the smell of decaying paper. Metal filing cabinets stood open and ransacked, their contents strewn across the floor by vandals or time itself. A thick layer of dust covered everything. "Bingo," Leo said, his flashlight beam landing on a massive drafting table in the center of the room. Rolls of blueprints were scattered across its surface and the floor around it, brittle and yellowed with age. Leo carefully unrolled the largest one. It was a master layout of the ground floor. "Here we are," he said, tracing a finger across the paper. "Main atrium, department store wing, and we are here." He tapped a small square room labeled Site Office. I leaned in, my own light illuminating the blueprint. My research included studying the publicly filed plans, and I knew them by heart. But something was wrong. "Leo," I said slowly. "What do you mean? It's a map." "I know, but look." I pointed to the corridor we just walked down. On this blueprint, it shows a service stairwell leading down to the sublevels about 50 feet back. There was no stairwell. It was a solid wall. Ben frowned, pulling up the digital copy of the plans on his tablet. "She's right. The public plans show a stairwell. This one in front of us doesn't. But this corridor we're in, on the plans, it's supposed to be 20 feet shorter." It was a small discrepancy, but it sent a fresh wave of unease through Needham. It was one thing for a site to differ from its plans. Construction often involved on-the-fly changes. It was another thing for the building to feel longer. Then my light caught it. Tucked under the drafting table, inside a weather-beaten cardboard tube, were another set of rolled-up prints. These felt different. The paper was heavier, higher quality. As I carefully unrolled them on a clear patch of floor, I saw why. These weren't construction blueprints. They were intricate, maddeningly complex schematics. The layout was similar to the Galleria, but twisted. Hallways spiraled into themselves like nautilus shells. Rooms were depicted with no visible doors, and all over the drawings, in the margins and even overlaying the architectural lines, were symbols. They weren't from any language I recognized. They were a bizarre mix of pseudo-alchemical notations, astrological signs, and complex geometric patterns that made my eyes hurt to look at. And in the center of it all, where the grand atrium should be, was a detailed drawing of the central spire, rendered with an obsessive, almost fanatical precision. It wasn't a fountain. It was an antenna, a focal point. "Guys," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "you need to see this." Leo and Ben crouched beside me, their flashlight beams dancing across the impossible drawings. "What the hell is this? Non-Euclidean geometry in a shopping mall?" "This," I said, a horrifying realization dawning on me as I connected the strange symbols, the impossible architecture, and the oppressive feeling of the building, "is the real blueprint." My gaze drifted from the paper to the darkness of the doorway, back towards the silent, waiting mall. The groan we heard earlier suddenly made a terrifying new kind of sense. It wasn't the sound of a building falling apart. It was the sound of it rearranging itself. This wasn't a tomb. It was a machine. And by entering it, we had just turned it on. The discovery of Finch's true blueprints changed everything. The air, already heavy, now felt charged with a predatory intelligence. We were no longer explorers documenting decay. We were lab rats who had just realized the maze was the experiment. "This is insane," Ben muttered, running a hand through his hair, his skepticism finally cracking. "You're saying the architect, this Finch guy, designed the mall to be, what, a puzzle box?" "Worse," I said, my eyes still tracing the maddening lines on the secret plans. "Look at the notations. These symbols, they're related to acoustics, resonance, sacred geometry. He wasn't just building a structure. He was building a resonator, a trap." Leo, ever the performer, saw the angle immediately. He turned his camera on the blueprints, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper for the live stream. "You heard it here first, Seekers. The Galleria wasn't a failure. It was a cover-up. The architect was into some seriously dark stuff. But what was he trying to trap?" As if on cue, the psychological assault began. It started subtly. A phantom sound, so faint I thought I was imagining it, the tinny, cheerful melody of an ice cream truck. I shook my head, but then Leo froze. "Do you guys hear that? Music. Like mall music." Ben nodded slowly. Muzak, cheesy 80s synth pop. We stood in perfect silence, straining our ears. There was nothing but the sound of our own breathing. Yet we'd all heard it. The building was playing tricks on us, plucking sounds from a collective memory of what this place was supposed to be. Then came the visions. They weren't hallucinations, not exactly. They were intrusive thoughts, flashes of desire so vivid they felt like memories. As we walked, I glanced into an empty storefront, and for a heartbeat, I saw it filled with books, a massive sign proclaiming Dr. Maya Vance's archaeological discoveries. I saw myself on a stage, accepting a prestigious research grant, the applause deafening. It was my deepest professional desire, manifested and beamed directly into my brain. I stumbled, shaking my head to clear it. "Leo, Ben, are you—" "My subscriber count," Leo said, his eyes wide, staring at his phone even though we had no signal. "I just saw it, 20 million. Ben was staring at a dark corner, a faint smile on his face. New truck, fully loaded F-350, paid in cash. The building was learning us. It was probing our minds, finding our ambitions, our greed, our desires, and projecting them back at us. It was a lure. Frightened, I pulled out my tablet, its battery thankfully full, and navigated to my offline research folder on Alistair Finch. I needed answers. I scanned through old newspaper articles, architectural journals, and forum posts from disgruntled construction workers. One article, a feature from a local magazine published just before the project's collapse, stood out. It praised Finch's genius, but hinted at his growing eccentricities. It quoted him, "A building is not merely a shelter. It is a vessel. It contains the energy of its purpose. A home contains the energy of a family, a library of knowledge, a cathedral of faith. But a mall? A modern mall is a temple to a new god, desire. It must be built accordingly." The words sent a chill down my spine. He knew. Even back then, he knew. I kept digging, my fingers flying across the screen. I found a post on a fringe conspiracy forum, an anonymous account claiming to be from the son of one of Finch's draftsmen. The post was rambling, mostly dismissed as nonsense, but one paragraph made me stop breathing. "My father said Mr. Finch went mad at the end. He locked himself in the site office for weeks. He wasn't drawing blueprints for a mall anymore. He called his new designs the cage. He said the developer's greed had woken something up in the ground, something that fed on ambition. He called it the anchor tenant. It had been there for millennia, sleeping, and they were building a monument to it, a buffet. So he redesigned it. He built a bottle for the genie, a trap to contain it forever. The collapse wasn't an accident. It was a mercy killing. The anchor tenant. The name was perfect. It wasn't a ghost tied to a single tragedy. It was a parasite, an entity drawn to the specific site of immense concentrated human ambition. The developers, the construction crews, Finch himself, they had all been its first meal. Now, after 30 years of starvation, we had just walked in, our heads full of our own petty desires for fame, fortune, and recognition. We hadn't just trespassed in an abandoned building. We had delivered ourselves to the front door of the monster's lair. The phantom smells hit us next, the scent of hot pretzels, of sugary cinnamon buns, from a Cinnabon that never existed. The food court, a concrete shell 50 yards away, was projecting a ghost menu, tempting us, drawing us deeper into the heart of the complex, closer to the central atrium, closer to the antenna that was designed to amplify its power. The building was hungry, and it was setting the table. We were being herded. Every corridor we took, guided by the phantom lures and our own morbid curiosity, led us inexorably inward. The geometry of the place felt increasingly wrong, the angles subtly shifting, the distances stretching. Finally, we emerged from a dark hallway into the mall's core, the central atrium. And it was breathtakingly wrong. The space was immense, a 4-story vertical chasm of concrete and steel, but it was a masterpiece of architectural insanity. Walkways and balconies jutted out at bizarre, non-functional angles, leading nowhere. Stairs ended abruptly, pointing at sheer concrete walls. It was a physical manifestation of the impossible drawings we'd found, a landscape designed by M.C. Escher on a very bad day. In the absolute center, rising from the floor and soaring towards the darkened skylights, was the spire. It wasn't a fountain or a sculpture. It was a twisted, complex antenna of concrete and rebar, spiraling upwards like a strand of corrupted DNA. The air around it seemed to shimmer, and the low subliminal humming we'd felt earlier was now a palpable, nauseating thrum that vibrated in our teeth. This was the heart of the trap. This was the lure. "My God," Ben whispered, lowering his camera. The show was over. This was real. Leo stared at the spire, mesmerized. This is it. This is the center of it all. The vision of his 20 million subscribers was likely flashing behind his eyes, more potent and alluring than ever in this place of power. It was then, standing at the precipice of this architectural nightmare, that I finally understood Finch's design. My mind raced, connecting the pieces, the secret blueprints, the acoustic symbols, the non-Euclidean geometry, the focus on the spire. "It's a cage," I said, the words tumbling out. "A spirit bottle, a Faraday cage for psychic energy. Everything is designed to draw the entity's focus here, to this spire, and contain it. The weird angles, the sound-dampening spaces, it's all part of the trap." "So it's trapped?" Ben asked with a sliver of hope. "We're safe?" "We're in the cage with it," I replied, my blood running cold, "and it's been waiting for company." As if to confirm my words, the humming intensified. The air around the spire began to distort, like heat haze off asphalt. But it wasn't heat. It was a ripple in perception itself, a warping of light and shadow. We weren't seeing a creature of flesh and blood. We were seeing the space it occupied, the way a predator's passage bends the tall grass. An intelligence washed over us, ancient, vast, and ravenously hungry. It felt like being scrutinized by a mountain. It knew we were there, and it was pleased. It was focusing on us, tasting our ambitions, our fears, our very presence. This was the anchor tenant, and it was feeding. The phantom music, the seductive visions, that was just the appetizer. We were the main course. The raw, desperate emotions we were feeling right now, our terror, our shock, our dawning despair, were a feast. The perceptual distortion coalesced, darkening over the spire. It wasn't forming a body. It was simply gathering its focus, its presence becoming so dense it was visible as a void in the dim light. We felt its attention lock on us, and in that moment, I understood the final terrible piece of the puzzle. The mall's creation, the greed and ambition of 1,000 people, had been the energy source to build the cage. The project's failure, Finch's sacrifice, had locked the door. For 30 years, the entity had been dormant, starving, until us. Our desires, our hunger for fame and discovery were the key. We hadn't just walked into the cage, we had unlocked it. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized us. The academic exercise was over. This was survival. "We have to go, now," I stammered, grabbing Leo's arm. He was still staring at the spire, his face pale, the bravado completely gone. "Back the way we came," Ben ordered, his voice tight with command. He was already moving, turning his back on the horrifying anti-visage in the center of the atrium. "Go, go, go!" We scrambled back into the corridor we'd emerged from, our flashlights bouncing wildly, our breath coming in ragged gasps. But the hallway that had been a straight shot from the department store wing was no longer straight. It curved now, a gentle, impossible arc that hadn't existed minutes before. "No," Ben said, stopping dead. "No, this is wrong." He shone his light on the wall. The concrete was seamless, covered in the same 30-year-old dust as everything else. There was no sign of a joint, no fresh construction. The building hadn't been altered. Its very reality had been rewritten. We retraced our steps, our hearts pounding against our ribs. The door to the architect's office was gone, replaced by a featureless slab of concrete that looked like it had been poured in 1993. The building was actively, silently trapping us. The anchor tenant's assault became direct. It had tasted our surface-level desires. Now it went for the jugular, for our deepest fears. The whisper started, carried on the dead air. Failure, a voice hissed in my mind, a perfect imitation of my old university advisor. You're a fraud, Maya. You'll never be published. You'll die in obscurity, just like Finch. Beside me, Leo flinched. Shut up, he muttered to the air. I saw the terror in his eyes. He was seeing it too. The phantom chat of his live stream, thousands of comments scrolling by, filled with hatred and mockery. Sellout, fake, clout chaser, you led them here to die. But it was Ben who was suffering the most. Ben, the pragmatist, the skeptic, was being bombarded with the tangible fears that had always haunted him. Visions of his gear failing, of his truck being repossessed, of the debt collector's calls he'd been dodging for months. He saw financial ruin, utter and complete. It's in our heads, I yelled, trying to cut through the psychic static. It's not real. It's trying to break us down. But the seed of paranoia had been planted in fertile ground. Ben, his face slick with sweat, rounded on Leo. You. He snarled, shoving Leo against the wall. This was your holy grail. You knew. You brought us here for this, for the views. You wanted this to happen. Ben, no! Leo cried, his hands up in surrender. I didn't know! Liar! Ben screamed. The entity was twisting his fear into rage, turning us against each other. He shoved Leo aside. I'm finding my own way out. To hell with both of you. He sprinted off down a darkened corridor to our right. Ben, wait! I screamed after him. Don't do it. We have to stick together. My voice echoed in the unnatural space. Then, from the direction Ben had run, came a sound that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. It was a low, wet, grinding noise, like a concrete mixer chewing on gravel and bone. It was followed by a single, terrified scream from Ben, a scream that was abruptly, horribly cut off, as if a hand had been clapped over his mouth. Silence. Leo and I looked at each other, our faces masks of pure horror. We crept forward, slowly, into the corridor where Ben had vanished. The grinding sound was gone. We called his name. Only the echo answered. My flashlight beam found it first. Lying on the floor was Ben's head cam. Its light was still on, pointed at the wall. And from the base of that wall, a pool of wet, gray concrete was spreading. It was fresh, oozing slowly like thick lava, already beginning to harden. Half submerged in the center of the pool, like a sinking buoy, was Ben's camera. There was no sign of Ben, no blood, no struggle, just the camera, sinking into the rapidly solidifying mass that had moments before been a solid wall. The building wasn't just trapping us, it was assimilating us. Ben was gone, absorbed. The reality of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and the strength from my knees. Leo slid down the wall opposite the horrifying scene, his face buried in his hands, his body racked with shuddering, silent sobs. His bravado, his charismatic host persona had been completely sandblasted away, leaving only a terrified young man who had led his friend to a monstrous end. The entity wasn't finished with us. It had tasted blood, and it was becoming more creative. The acoustics of the mall began to warp. We heard Ben's voice, clear as day, calling for help from a distant corridor. Maya, Leo, I'm over here. It's a way out. Don't listen, I whispered, my voice trembling. It's not him. It's the building. But the cruelty was exquisite. It used his voice, his exact inflection, turning our hope into another instrument of torture. The phantom sounds of a busy mall returned, but they were distorted now, nightmarish. The cheerful music was off-key, the announcements were garbled, demonic whispers. We were forced to move, driven by the certainty that to stay still was to be consumed like Ben. We navigated the shifting maze, and the mall began to reveal its new artistry. In our path, crude sculptures began to appear. They were horrifying, abstract figures twisted from rebar and caked in fresh concrete, like parodies of human forms. They were positioned in ways that suggested they were watching us pass, the jagged, rusty limbs reaching for us in the darkness. The entity was using the materials of its prison, its own body, to craft effigies of its victims. The lights began to fail. The copper wiring in the walls, now an extension of the entity's nervous system, was being used to generate electromagnetic fields. Our powerful flashlights would flicker and die at the worst possible moments, plunging us into absolute blackness before sputtering back to life, revealing a rebar statue that hadn't been there a second before. Leo broke completely. He got to his feet, no longer crying, his face a mask of crazed desperation. "Is this what you want?" He screamed at the ceiling, his voice cracking. "You want a show? Here it is." He started running, recklessly, shouting challenges at the walls, no longer a performer for a camera, but a man consumed by a terror so profound it had become a form of madness. I ran after him, grabbing his jacket. "Leo, stop! You're giving it exactly what it wants. Fear, despair." We dragged him into a small utility closet, slamming the metal door shut, plunging us into the claustrophobic dark. We huddled there, listening to the mall groan and shift around us. I fumbled for my tablet, my only link to a world of logic and reason. I had to find a weakness. There had to be an escape. Frantically, I scrolled through my saved research, my mind racing. Finch. It all came back to Finch. He designed the trap. He must have designed a failsafe, a way out. My eyes scanned the text of the conspiracy forum post, the rambling interview with the traumatized construction worker, the disgraced architect's own words. And then I found it. It wasn't in the mainstream articles. It was a scanned image, buried deep on a university server. A copy of a final rambling letter Finch had written to a colleague, dated the day before the collapse. My flashlight beam shook as I read his confession. "They think me a failure," it began, the handwriting erratic, panicked. "Let them. Bankruptcy is a small price to pay for salvation. I have seen the anchor tenet. It was drawn by the raw, focused avarice of the project. It feeds on ambition. My own creative pride was a delicacy for it. Horrified, I realized what I was building. Not a temple, but a trough. So I redesigned it. I turned their monument to greed into a cage of concrete and geometry. I bankrupted them all on purpose, a necessary sacrifice to ensure the lure was never activated by the desires of a million shoppers. But a cage this powerful requires a key, a release valve. Its power is belief, its fuel is desire. To contain it, you must leave it empty. To escape it, you must become anathema to it. The trap has a flaw, a single point where the geometry fails, where the rules of this place do not apply. But to reach it, you must starve the architecture. Don't desire, don't want, don't fear, don't hope. Become empty. It is the only way. Walk through the monster's belly, but give it nothing to digest. A diagram was scrawled at the bottom of the letter, a single perfect right-angled corridor amidst a sea of impossible loops and spirals. It was labeled the anomaly, the way out. I looked at Leo, who was rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. "Leo," I said, my voice filled with a desperate, fragile hope. "I know how to get out." Getting Leo to understand was the first battle. He was a man hollowed out by terror, his mind a playground for the entity. "There is no way out," he whispered, his eyes unfocused. "We're already dead. We're just waiting for the concrete." "No," I insisted, shaking him, forcing him to look at the tablet. "Look, Finch made a door. But the key isn't a key. It's nothing. We have to feel nothing. No hope, no fear, no desire. It feeds on that stuff. We have to starve it." The concept was so abstract, so contrary to every survival instinct, that it sounded like madness. But it was the only path Finch had left us. We had to try. We pushed open the closet door and stepped back into the living nightmare. The race began. It was a race through shifting corridors and mind-bending spaces, but the true battlefield was within our own skulls. The anchor tenant sensing our intention threw everything it had at us. The rebar sculptures became more animated, their concrete limbs scraping towards us as we passed. The phantom whispers intensified, no longer just taunts, but promises. A vision of the Nobel Prize medal, my name engraved on it, flashed in my mind's eye. "It's yours, Maya," the entity cooed. "Just stay. Study me. You will be legendary." I gritted my teeth, focusing on the image of a blank white wall. I am nothing. I want nothing. The vision flickered and died. For Leo, the test was crueler. The phantom roar of a massive, adoring crowd filled the corridor. "Leo! Leo! Leo!" it chanted. He saw himself on a stage, accepting a Streamer of the Year award, his streaming count displayed on a giant screen behind him, ticking past 50 million. "They love me," he mumbled, a flicker of the old Leo returning. "They're not real, Leo," I shouted, grabbing his hand, my own apathy cracking. "It's a trick. Be empty." He squeezed his eyes shut, chanting under his breath. "I am no one. I want nothing." The cheering faded, replaced by the deep, angry groan of them all. We followed the diagram from Finch's letter, a mental map I had to hold onto against the disorienting shifts in the architecture. A left turn where a wall used to be, straight through the space that was once a sunken seating area. The entity fought us, walls oozing wet concrete to block our path, forcing us to detour, to wade through the thick, gray sludge that I knew was laced with the remains of our friend. The battle of will was exhausting. To feel nothing is impossible. We had to constantly fight back the tide of terror and the seductive whispers of our deepest desires. It was a state of pure meditative negation, and the strain was immense. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of this psychological warfare, we saw it. Down a short hallway, past a particularly gruesome sculpture of twisted rebar, was a door. It was a simple, metal maintenance door, unremarkable in every way. But according to Finch's diagram, this was it, the anomaly, the architectural flaw. As we stumbled towards it, the entity launched its final, desperate assault. The air grew thick and heavy, the pressure immense. It projected an image of Ben, whole and unharmed, standing in front of the door. "Guys," he shouted, waving, "I found it. I'm okay. It was all a trick of the light." "Stop, Leo," his face contorted with a sudden, terrible hope. "Ben?" "It's not him, Leo," I screamed, pulling him forward. "Wanting him back is a desire. It will feed on it. He's gone." The word "gone" was the cruelest, most necessary weapon. The hope died in Leo's eyes, replaced by a vast, desolate emptiness that was in that moment our salvation. The image of Ben flickered, distorted, and dissolved into a shower of static in our minds. We reached the door. I threw my shoulder against the push bar. It opened. The moment we crossed the threshold, the pressure vanished. The humming stopped, the whispers ceased. The crushing weight on our souls lifted as if a switch had been flipped. We weren't outside yet. We were in a simple, right-angled concrete service corridor. It was dirty. It was dark, but it was gloriously, beautifully normal. The entity's influence could not penetrate this single, mundane flaw in its otherwise perfect prison. We didn't pause. We ran. We followed the corridor as it sloped upwards towards a faint sliver of gray light. We burst through the final door and spilled out into the pre-dawn chill, collapsing on damp grass and gravel, gasping the clean, cold air of the real world. We didn't look back. We scrambled to our feet, grabbed the gear we had left near our entry point, and fled. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a sickly gray light on the world, but it was the most beautiful sunrise I had ever seen. The monolithic silhouette of the Galleria at Black Creek behind us was silent once more. The live stream had cut to static hours ago, sometime after Ben's disappearance. Our thousands of viewers had been left in a state of terrified, confused suspense, flooding the chat with theories and panic before the channel went completely offline. Back at my apartment, the three of us, or what was left of us, huddled in the living room. The footage from our cameras was the only thing that proved we weren't insane. We plugged in Leo's primary camera and my head cam. The playback was a nightmare. Much of the video was corrupted, plagued by glitches and visual noise, especially in the central atrium. But what it did capture was horrifying enough. It showed hallways that visibly stretched and curved. It showed doors that were there 1 second and gone the next. The audio was a chaotic mess of our own panicked shouts, overlaid with the phantom mall music, the whispers, and the deep, groaning infrasound of the entity. We had proof. It was chaotic, terrifying, and utterly unbelievable. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound, the hum of my laptop. "This is it," Leo finally said, his voice a hoarse rasp. He sounded decades older. "This is the biggest episode of our careers, the most important piece of found footage in history. We released this and we're legends." The old Leo was still in there, somewhere, twitching with the ghost of ambition. But I saw the truth in his haunted eyes. "And then what?" I asked quietly. "We become famous? And a dozen other Urbex crews, 100 other fame seekers and paranormal investigators see our video and decide they have to be the ones to get the real story. They'll go there, Leo, full of ambition, full of desire to prove themselves. Full of everything the anchor tenant needed to feed. We would be ringing the dinner bell." The terrible choice settled over us. We could honor Ben's memory by showing the world the monster that took him, achieving the fame we had all, in our own ways, craved. Or we could honor Alistair Finch's sacrifice, bury the story, and leave the monster to starve in the silent concrete cage he had built for it. The silence stretched on. It was the memory of Ben's final, abruptly silenced scream that made the decision. It was the image of his camera sinking into that pool of fresh concrete. I leaned forward and ejected the SD card from Leo's camera. I took the one from my own. I didn't say a word. I walked over to the small balcony of my apartment, the cool morning air on my face. With Leo watching, I snapped both cards in half and let the pieces fall into the planter box below, burying them in the soil. Later that day, I logged onto the Asylum Seekers website for the last time. Our faces, smiling and full of reckless energy, stared back at me from the header image. I typed a single, final post. "We are discontinuing the series, effective immediately. Thank you for all your support over the years. Some places are empty for a reason. Some stories should not be told." I hit publish. Then I navigated to the cloud backup of our expedition's footage. The files were there, a long list of corrupted data. The thumbnail for the last stable clip showed the three of us standing at the edge of the main atrium, staring into the impossible geometry of the mall's heart. With a trembling hand, I selected all the files, and I dragged the folder to the trash icon on my desktop. A small window popped up. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items?" I stared at the screen, at the ghost of our ambition. I thought of Ben, and of Finch, and of the vast, patient hunger still sleeping in the dark. I clicked yes. Fade to black. Enjoy the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.